Well, good evening, folks. It's been a glorious, sunny, intercepting day in North Lincolnshire, and I've been out on my bike, enjoying my new exhaust system and purring along. It wasn't such a glorious day for my friend Len over in Liverpool, and he went out on his bike today for a fairly long run, and he's got a handlebar mounted voltmeter display, as you can see, and it normally reads 14 to 14.2 volts as he drives along. But today you noticed that it was fluctuating anywhere from 12 volts to 13.5, 13.8, back to 12, and it acted a little bit as a sort of early warning system for him. So he turned around and went home, parked his bike in his back garden, and then, like you do, couldn't resist starting it up again, except when he turned the key, the bike was completely dead electrically. There was nothing, no fairy lights, no bouncing needles, nothing at all. Multiple tries of the key, zero. So he phoned me up and said, I've got a problem. The problem really was that his bike had got a problem, of course. So we worked our way through checking with a multimeter the ignition switch, the main ignition switch, the relays, everything really, and reached a kind of dead end, and thought, right, the methodical analytical approach will pay off, hopefully. So finally we nailed it. And the problem is this thing. That is the starter motor solenoid. It lives under the bike, right next door to the stock position for the rectifier regulator, which, as in previous videos, is exposed to road filth, dirt, heat, and so on. Now, Len's relocated his rectifier regulator ages ago, as have many other people now. But of course the starter motor solenoid is still underneath the battery tray. It's fiendishly difficult to get at. It's very difficult. So Len phoned me, and we had about a 2-hour phone conversation with Len with his spanners in Liverpool, and me sort of flying by wire at this end, and between the pair of us we finally nailed the problem. So that's the starter motor solenoid assembly. The two thick cables, the one with a ring on the end of it goes to the negative terminal of the battery, and the one with the red plastic cover goes to the positive terminal of the battery. The smaller black wire is a negative to earth through the wiring harness, and the small thin diameter red wire with the red block connector on the end of it connects into the wiring harness. That red wire is the only wire that powers the bike, so it is all of the power that goes into the bike, it goes to the ignition switch, and so effectively that is the main artery of power to the bike. The hefty cables are connected together by the solenoid, so when the thinner gauge wires get current going through them, it activates an electromagnetic switch which plonks together two heavy duty contacts which enable a circuit along the hefty wires, and then it turns the starter motor. Then when you let your thumb off the starter button, the solenoid spring makes the contacts disengage, so it doesn't turn your starter motor forever. But similarly, to charge the battery, the output from the rectifier regulator unit, from the alternator, it all goes down that red wire, that thin diameter red wire. So it is the main vein or artery, whichever way you look at it, to the bike's electrical system. Len's bike was completely and utterly dead, and we checked, as part of the process, we checked the main fuse box on the bike. The second fuse down is the main fuse. It's a 30 amp. The one above it's also 30 amp, and that's the rectifier regulator output fuse. So fuse number 2 is the one which is the main fuse, which effectively connects the battery to the bike and makes everything switch on. So I've got the Royal Enfield service manual on my computer basically, it's not a hard copy. So I had a look at the wiring diagram for the relevant bit. So this next photo shows how that solenoid operates. Here comes the picture. So it's one red wire coming out of the battery to the solenoid. Those hefty wires are moulded, as are the thin gauge ones, moulded into the solenoid. It's not like a car one or a Japanese bike or whatever with nuts and things. They're moulded in, which is a bit of a pain. So this circuit diagram shows the one red wire coming out of the positive terminal of the battery. They call it a relay starter here, but it's actually it's a starter solenoid. So you've only got one positive wire coming out that goes to the starter solenoid, and then piggybacked on it is that battery positive, the red one, the oblong with a 1 in it. So that powers the whole bike, and it also takes the charge back from the rectifier regulator back to the battery. So it's a sort of parasitic wire really that is joined onto block terminals that the starter solenoid has, as per the previous picture. So there is the red block terminal on that, and the negative one is the thin black wire on the previous photo. So this next picture shows the fuse box. When testing this with the voltmeter, there was 0 voltage at fuse number 2. Fuse number 2 is the main fuse. So you've got red on the left hand side from the solenoid, and then you've got brown on the right going to the ignition switch. There was no voltage whatsoever at number 3. So we then tested the continuity of the wire using an ohm setting, and the wire was fine, the actual wire. However, at the end that joins the solenoid, you've got a rubber shroud, a vinyl shroud thing, which is acting like a funnel for road filth. If you look at that picture there, it's slightly blurred, but you'll see a better one in a minute. That is the red block terminal from the starter motor solenoid, and into that should go a spade terminal. That green stuff is general crud, copper oxide, who knows, road muck, and that shroud has acted as a funnel. You can see all that dirt inside it off the road. It's gone up into it, directing all that road muck and water and what have you onto this block connector under the battery tray. And there should be a wire. There was a wire going past that green crud into the block terminal. This is a picture of the actual wire that was from the solenoid. So this is the actual wire itself, and as you can see, it's very, very corroded. The terminal's really bad. Bearing in mind that is the only power supply to the wiring harness that powers everything, and it also carries the current back to the battery from the rectifier regulator. So what's happened is it's got covered in road filth underneath the bike. It's corroded. The only solution in this particular case was to cut off the red block, so cutting it off at the wiring harness and at the starter solenoid wire, just getting rid of the red block terminal and putting onto it a spade male and female connector suitably wrapped in self-amalgamating tape to make it waterproof. That was the cause of the problem. It was the most difficult bit. As I say, Len said it was a nightmare to get at. I am going to do this on my bike. Len's bike is 2019 and it's done 12,500 miles. Mine's at 2019, it's done 7.5. So effectively, Len broke down, fortunately in his own back garden, because had he gone to a petrol station first and turned off, he'd have had a completely dead bike and ended up pushing it back from the petrol station or wherever, or middle of nowhere. And it's all because of that under the bike. So just like the rectifier regulator suffers from being close to the road and covered in filth and overheating and burning out, This is in a similar, virtually the same location. It's exposed to road filth, and it corroded the terminal so badly. That's why his voltmeter was fluctuating, because the contact was so poor, and it just came out of the blue, just straight out of the blue. And having turned it off, it was then dead when he turned it back on seconds later, all because of that. I suspect this is probably going to be a thing on lots of these bikes, simply because it's in the wrong place again. It's got that funnel thing on it that's acting as a sort of capture point for road muck and water, and making things worse, I think. So if you have a completely dead bike, or if indeed you're concerned that yours might be like this, I think it's probably worth having a look at. I definitely intend to do it. It took me and Len probably 2 to 3 hours today of just trying to find what the fault was. The giveaway, of course, was that there was no power to the fuse box. But that piggyback wire off the solenoid was the issue. So I thought I would share that with people. And I've received an email only today about somebody who had to push his bike back from somewhere, and has begun taking it apart. It could easily be this, but it's certainly something to bear in mind. I intend to take my battery tray off, and it is difficult, apparently, tricky, Len says, to check that, because I don't want to find that I go somewhere, turn off, fill up with petrol, and then find I've got a dead bike. As I say, I know I'm repeating myself, but that's exactly what happened to Len, fortuitously in his own back garden. So I think it's going to be well worth looking at, and I'm going to be thinking about doing some sort of fix for this, possibly relocating things. But anyway, in the meantime, take care out on your bikes, and I'd welcome any comments, opinions, experiences. That would be really good. So take care and speak soon.